Hello, my lovely primary 4 students. I am Mrs. Dua Abbasi, and we will continue with you Concept 1, Force and Motion. We learned 2 important key vocabulary so far, force and motion, and learned that there are different forces that act on starting and stopping objects. Also, we start a simple discussion about the relation between force and energy. تعلمنا لحد دلوقتي 2 key vocabulary القوة والحركة، وكمان اتكلمنا ببساطة عن العلاقة ما بين الطاقة والقوة. And for now, we will start lesson 3 from Learn. So, get your student book and tools and be ready to start. In this lesson, we will focus more on the relation between forces, their types, and their effect on motion. هنتكلم عن الفورسز وأنواعها وعلاقتها بالحركة. Do you remember the types of forces that act on a starting and stopping object? فاكرين ايه أنواع الفورسز دي؟ The force that push objects is called pushing force. Push يبقى pushing force. And the force that pull the object is called pulling force. Pull تبقى pulling force. Do you remember the force that keep us stable on the ground? That's right, it's gravity force. Gravity force is the force that pulls things down towards the ground. Here is the earth. والgravity هي الجاذبية اللي بتخلي كل الأوبجكتس stable على الأرض. خلي بالكم ركزوا stable or still يبقى أنا بتكلم على الgravity اللي بتشد كل الأوبجكتس على الأرض. If we observed the world around us, we would find many examples where pulling and pushing forces are used. As we reviewed the different forces, we can talk more about cause and effect, سبب والنتيجة. Cause and effect relation between mean pulling and pushing forces, and we are going to talk about this in activity 6, observe like a scientist. Our activity is entitled Force. We will know more by watching the video and reading a text. But first, you should think about everything you know about the force that acts on starting and stopping objects. Then, answer the 2 questions in the book. The first question says, what are some examples of starting or stopping motion with a push? عايزة examples على حاجات بنبتدي بيها أو بنوقف بيها الأوبجكت عن طريق البوشنج قوة الدفع. The second question is, what are some examples of starting or stopping motion with pull? عايزة examples لقوة سحب. For me, when I think of examples, I start by observing everything around and think about how it starts its motion. Does it need to be pushed to move like the ball need to be pushed or pulled to move like the door to open it? هل هي يا ترى بتحتاج ان انا ادفعها زي الكورة وانا بحدفها كده ولا هي محتاجة ان انا اسحبها زي الدور؟ Try to think and start recording your examples in book page 147. If you looked around you, you would find many examples of pushing and pulling everywhere, like picking up a book or pushing something to make it move. زي ما يجي كده اخد البوك pulling up a book or pushing something to make it move. Even the things that may appear stable could be affected by different forces in reality. Let's explore more examples in the video titled Force. Let's go and play it. Our activity is activity 6 that's entitled Force. So let's watch the video. While watching the video, be ready, and when you hear our friend saying pushing or pulling, start recording simple sentences to remember the examples she will list. This will also help us identify the cause and effect relation between pushing, pulling, and motion. احنا اتكلمنا عن انواع كتير جدا من الفورسز. اتكلمنا عن البوشنج والبولينج والجرافيتي. احنا دلوقتي بنجمع examples مختلفة عن البوشنج والبولينج فورسز موجودة في حياتنا. أول ما تسمعوا كلمة push and pull ابتدوا اكتبوا ببساطة كده جمل قصيرة عن الإكزامبلز اللي هي بتقولها. Let's start.
Hi, I'm Cassie. Welcome to Real World Science.
Real World Science. Real World Science.
Every day, the world is shaped and changed by forces. Forces set the world in motion. So get ready to move as we explore forces in the real world.
Real World Science. Real World Science. Science in the real world.
Ever wonder what causes things to move faster than a speeding train? Or slower than a tortoise? Or what makes things stay still and not move at all? The word is force. Right at this very moment, forces are at work all around you and me. Forces make it possible to sit in a chair without floating into space or falling into the earth. What is force? Simply stated, force is a push or a pull on an object that causes a change in its motion. Forces are involved in just about everything you do every single day. Every force is either a push or a pull. Pressing a button, closing a drawer, and throwing a snowball are examples of a push, while opening a drawer, unplugging a wire, and lifting a book are examples of a pull. These push and pull forces exist throughout the universe and help to shape and change our world. For example, the moon pulls on the oceans, causing low and high tides. A magnet pulls iron particles towards it, and a nuclear explosion pushes objects out with tremendous power. We'll talk more about that later.
I recorded all the examples that Kathy said. Let's review them together and add them to the examples we wrote in the book. Open your book on page 147 and write down with me. The examples that Kathy said about pushing forces are pressing a button on a computer keyboard زي ما أنا بكتب على الكيبورد I press buttons. Closing the drawer بقفل الدرج or throwing a snowball. And from the examples of pulling force حاجة أنا بسحبها opening the drawer وأنا بفتح الدرور وأنا بفتح الدرج unplugging a wire وأنا بشد السلك and lifting a book وأنا برفع البوك. واخدين بالكم في فرق الحركة pushing أنا بزق الحاجة pulling أنا بسحبها. Kathy also said examples about pushing and pulling forces in the universe that help shape the world and change it. Do you remember when we talked about gravity? The gravity force of the moon causes high and low tides. قوة الجذب بتاعة القمر هي اللي بتعمل المد والجزر اللي بيبقى في البحر، إن ساعات المية تبقى عالية قوي أو تبقى قليلة. And this is an example of the pulling force. Is there anyone who can have a magnet and try it at home? Yes, many of you have magnets. Of course, you can observe that magnets pull any metal or some of the metals towards it. And this is another example of the pulling force. Kathy reminded us of the tug of war game, which we talked about in our last lesson. Let's complete the video and complete talking after that.
Tug of war is an excellent example of a force that is a pull. Now, when a force is exerted on any object, it causes a reaction. In this case, you'll notice that at some points, neither team moves. Why? Well, it's because the force is balanced. When both teams are exerting an equal amount of force, neither team moves. But if one team begins to exert more force than the other, the weaker team gives up ground, and the balance of forces is nullified. Let's repeat those basic concepts one more time. Every force is a push or a pull. All forces are either balanced or unbalanced. Forces make it possible for these cheerleaders to make a pyramid. In order for the pyramid to keep its shape, the forces must remain balanced. All of the people in the pyramid must exert equal amounts of force on each other. If the forces become out of balance, the pyramid will collapse and change shape until the force is balanced again.
When we talked about Tug of War game the last lesson, we knew about all the types of forces. All types of forces can be balanced or unbalanced. In a tug of war game, each team pulls the rope towards them. And because in the beginning, each team pulls the rope with equal forces, خدتوا بالكم من كلمة equal, the forces become balanced. القوة بتبقى متوازنة لما يبقوا two teams pull a rope with equal forces. So it's balanced forces. No one of the two teams move. And the rope remains in its place. But when a team pull with a greater force, the force becomes unbalanced. هتبقى غير متزنة. So the rope moves towards them, which means that this group wins because they have greater force. Imagine if there weren't forces like pulling or pushing. What will happen? This is question 3 that we need to answer in our student book. The question is, think of a time when you use the force. How would this activity be if there was no push or pull? تخيلوا كده أي activity انتوا بتعملوها في يومكم. إيه اللي هيحصل لو ما كانش فيه push و pull force? Think about a specific something you make. How do you think it might happen without pushing or pulling force? Take your time and think about the answer. You can read the text and underline the most important information that can help you. I'm curious to know what you wrote. Let's discuss this. I thought about 2 examples. One is about transportation and the other one is about reading books. If we want to get in any vehicle and go to a specific place, the car or the bus needs a pushing force to start its movement. احنا متفقين ان اي object عشان يبتدي حركته محتاج pushing force. And if this force doesn't exist, we will stay in our place or we need to walk for long distance. لو انا هركب باص او عربيه وما كانش فيه pushing force طبيعي ان الاوبجكت ده مش هيتحرك، فبالتالي I have 2 options, either to stay in my place or to walk for long distance. If I want to read a book and the pulling force doesn't exist, لو انا عايزه اقرا كتاب ومفيش pulling force, the result is that I cannot pull the book from its place, so I cannot turn its pages to read it. And even when things are still and aren't moving, they are affected by different forces. Let me show you if there is no pushing force or pulling force إيه اللي هيحصل. If I have this car and I want to move it from here to there, لو مفيش pushing force إيه اللي هيحصل؟ لو مفيش pushing force I will not be able to move it. طيب if I have pushing force and I moved it there, تمام؟ بس there is no pulling force. Can I return it back? لا مش هقدر ارجعها برضو. تمام. Let's complete talking about the force that keep you standing and stilling on the earth, which is the gravity force. Gravity force pull you and make you stay still and stable. Still and stable is a key word for gravity. Okay? And when we finish our lesson, you might pull your toys from the ground or your bag. At that time, you will pull the bag. The gravity force will be also pulling it downward. في نفس الوقت اللي أنا بشد الأوبجكت كمان الجرافيتي is attracting it downward. ما ننساش إن اتجاه الجرافيتي دايما downward towards the earth. So there are here 2 forces that affect the bag at the same time. The pulling force والgravity. Think also of what will happen if we can push the object in the same direction only. Let's do that together. I'll push the activity icon in your direction. خلي بالكم احنا دلوقتي بنعمل ايه؟ بنجرب نعمل force of one direction بس. Okay? I'll push the activity icon in your direction. How can I move it back if there is only one direction? The only solution is to remain in its place. Why? Because there should be a pulling force to move it back. So can you now conclude the cause and effect relation between pulling and pushing forces and between the motion? أكيد أخدتوا بالكم إن أنا لما عملت pushing للأيكون وكان عندي pushing force بس مفيش pulling force ما قدرتش أرجعها مكانها. وده بيأثر أكيد على الأكتيفيتيز بتاعتنا لأن إحنا we need to do both pushing and pulling forces. The pulling and pushing forces are the cause of making the object start its motion, stop or change its direction. يبقى من أسباب الحركة أو التوقف أو تغيير الاتجاه إن أنا يكون عندي pushing or pulling force. Or maybe change its speed, as we saw in the car racing. When we increase the pushing force by increasing the fire extinguishers numbers, the result that will happen due to this that you will see the object in motion fast. لما زودنا الفاير extinguishers لقينا ان السبيد كمان اتغيرت. يبقى البوشنج والبولينج بيغيروا مكان الاوبجكت، ممكن يغيروا الدايركشن بتاعه، ممكن يغيروا السبيد بتاعته كمان. Don't forget the cause and effect relation helps scientists while studying different phenomena. You can practice more what we have learned so far by doing activities that help you understand about the different forces in the optional digital activity 7. Let's look together in the textbook. Okay. Activity number 7, observe like a scientist, tug of war game. Do you remember this photo? The question it has is, draw how the tug of war game will be if the two teams are equal. فاكرين لما الفورسز كانت بتبقى equal ايه اللي كان بيحصل؟ نوع الفورس اسمه ايه؟ ويا ترى هيحصل موشن ولا لا؟ افتكروا هتكتبوا نوع الفورس وهيحصل موشن ولا لا؟ Remember what we learned in the last and today's lesson. So you need to draw what would happen if the two teams were equal and pulled the rope with the same equal force. I'm excited to see your sketches and you can share them with us on مدرستنا Facebook page. I'm looking forward and really excited to see all of your sketches. Now, what about the cause that make the object stop its motion? احنا اتكلمنا عن ايه الحاجات اللي بتخلي الاوبجكت تتحرك. اتكلمنا ان عندي pushing force و pulling force هي اللي بتخلي الاوبجكت تتحرك. ولازم الفورسز دي تكون unbalanced عشان تسبب حركة. طول ما هي balanced و equal مش هيحصل motion. دلوقتي هنتكلم عن الحاجات اللي بتخلي الاوبجكت تقف. We will explore this together in activity 8, analyze like a scientist. In Analyze Like a Scientist, we will read a text titled Stopping Motion. After reading the text and knowing the different causes that make objects stopping its motion, we could expect how the object's energy is changed because of collision. It happens when the object hits something. هنعرف ازاي الأوبجكتس هتقف لما يحصل اصطدام. Remember that moving objects have energy, like when you need the energy to do your daily activities. Before reading, if you looked at page 148, you would find a group of words before the text. ايه هي الwords دي؟ Slow down, force, moving objects, stop, friction. I want you to read the text quickly, then identify the sentences that contain these words and write down your predictions about them and their relation to the topic. خلي بالكم الكلمات دي أهم كلمات عندنا. كل ما هنلاقي sentence بتشرح المعنى بتاعهم عايزاكم تعملوا underline عليها. I'll give you some time to identify the words, then I'll share with you my lovely students' answers. Maya was the first one who identified where are these words in the text correctly. She wants to share with you the first word. The first word was friction because it's a new word. يعني إيه friction؟ يعني قوة احتكاك. Maya said that when she rides a bike, she uses the brakes to slow down or stop, and the tires touch the ground. مايا بتقول لما هي بتركب البايسكل اللي بيحصل بتستخدم البريكس اللي هي الفرامل عشان تعمل ايه؟ To make the bike slow down or stop. يعني ايه slow down؟ slow down بمعنى انها تبطأ وstop بمعنى انها تقف تماما. اوكي؟ وقت ما هي بتعمل كده the bicycle tires بتعمل صوت احتكاك مع الأرض. The same goes with the car when we use the brake. She thinks this is friction as it's a force that make the moving objects الفريكشن دي force بتأثر على moving objects وهتخليهم يعملوا ايه؟ They either slow down or stop. الفريكشن هتخلي moving objects يا إما يحصل لهم slowing down بمعنى إن هم يبطئوا أو stopping بمعنى إن هم يقفوا. Let's underline together another sentence that has the words moving objects and stop. This sentence is at the beginning of page 149. Moving objects only stop when a force of the same size is applied to them in the opposite direction from which they are moving. الموفينج objects هتقف لما يبقى فيه فورس مضادة للاتجاه جاية من اتجاه عكسهم ولازم تبقى الفورس دي equal ليهم عشان توقفهم. I want you now to read the text carefully, then write your explanations about the causes of stopping motion by using 4 words or more from our list of words. The text we read at the beginning shows the cause that make an object stay still and stable in its place, like this photo. What do you think make it stable? When this photo is on the table, we are sure that the gravity force affect it and pull it downward. احنا متفقين ان اي object standing still واقف ثابت في مكانه هيبقى فيه فورس انا مش شايفها بعيني اسمها gravity عشان الارث عندها gravity يعني قوة جاذبية. الجرافيتي دي بتpush any object downward بتpull any object downward بتشده لتحت. However, the table push it up by its pushing force. Gravity pull it down لكن التيبل بتpush it up. How can we be sure that there is a pushing force from the table? The evidence is that if we suddenly push the table away, لو أنا فجأة زقيت التيبل from under the photos will fall because of the gravity force. The pushing force of the table has the same size of the gravity force that pull it downward, and they are both in opposite direction. Do you remember when we agreed that if there are 2 forces of the same size affecting the same object and are in opposite direction, we call them what? خدتوا بالكم من كلمة equal و opposite directions? Yes, they are called balanced forces. قوة متوازنة. And the result will be that the object will not move. دايما لما بيبقى عندي balanced forces النتيجة بتبقى ان الأوبجكت ما بيتحركش وأي أوبجكت حوالينا واقف في مكانه عليه 2 forces. gravity بتشده لتحت وعليه pushing force من التيبل أو من الأوبجكت اللي هو قاعد عليها. Okay? But if the forces are unbalanced, the object will start moving maybe quickly or slowly. لو الفورسز دي ابتدت ما تبقاش balanced يعني ما تبقاش equal وقتها الأوبجكت هيبتدي يتحرك. What about stopping motion? What are the causes? When I asked my students to write their explanation like you, I found that Malak wrote, the moving objects are stopped if they were hit with another object with the same force and in opposite direction. يعني لو الأوبجكت بيتحرك كده عشان يقف لازم يبقى فيه object جاي في opposite direction وكمان يبقى جاي ب the same force. تمام؟ Excellent, Malak. Your explanations show one of the causes of stopping motion, which is collision الاصطدام. The car is affected by two types of forces, pushing force of the engine and gravity force. لازم يبقى عندها pushing force والgravity. الpushing بتمشيها لقدام والgravity بتشدها downward. When the car hit the wall with its pushing force, it's affected by a new force, and it is the source of this force, it's the wall. The car is stopped by the pushing force of the wall, which is in the opposite direction of the car movement. ايه اللي خلى العربية تقف لما بيحصل اصطدام؟ لما العربية بتمشي قدام بالبوشنج فورس طبعا بيبقى فيه برضو جرافيتي بتشدها لتحت. أول ما بتخبط في وال، الوال دي عندها فورس acting in the opposite direction، هو ده اللي هيخلي يحصل stopping of motion. هدى wrote a different explanation. Friction is a force that causes objects to slow down or stop, which is another cause of stopping motion. يبقى من الحاجات اللي هتخلي الأوبجكتس تقف إن يبقى فيه friction. الفريكشن بتبقى في opposite direction و equal amount. Let's draw together a simple sketch to show the meaning of friction. Let's take the car as an example of moving object. هنرسم كار ونبتدي نشوف ايه الفورسز اللي هتأفكت الكار دي. Do you remember when we read the text in the beginning and we said that different forces affect the objects? Imagine if this is the car. It's affected by gravity. طب how can I represent gravity على الدrawing? It's represented by down arrow. احنا متفقين ان الجرافيتي دايما بتبقى towards the earth. So the gravity is always represented by a downward arrow. Okay? And the pushing force of the car معناها قوة الدفع بتاعت العربية، يعني العربية تمشي في أي direction. So this is the pushing force of the car. معنى ان دي pushing force of the car يعني العربية فيها force كده، يبقى العربية moving forward. Okay? So these are the two forces while the car is moving. طب while the car is moving في حاجة تانية بتحصل. Its tires، التايرز اللي هو كاوتش العربية، its tires is rubbing on the ground like when I rub my hands like this. يعني ايه rubbing؟ يعني بيحصل احتكاك like when I rub my hand like this. The car is going in a direction and the friction between the tires and the ground is in the opposite direction. ركزوا جدا على ان الفريكشن دايما بتحصل في الopposite direction. عشان يحصل احتكاك لازم التو objects يبقوا ماشيين عكس بعض. Okay? So if I want to represent the friction على الدrawing لازم هرسم الارو opposite للpushing force. قوة الاحتكاك بتبقى في الopposite direction. Friction force. تمام؟ This causes a resistance. يعني ايه resistance؟ مقاومة between the car and the ground. Like when you push a huge box on the ground. So it rubs on it. لو أنا بزق صندوق على الأرض بيحصل friction ما بين الصندوق والأرض. And you cannot push it easily. Same when the car brakes. Car brakes الفرامل. When I press car brakes, the friction increases. So the car stops. عايزين نربط 3 كلمات مع بعض. كلمة friction, slowing down, stopping، وكمان معاهم إن الفريكشن لازم تبقى في opposite direction. So if the moving object is affected by a force of the same size and opposite to its direction, it will stop, like what we saw about friction and collision. Also, because the moving objects have energy and this energy increases as the object speeds up, كل ما الأوبجكت ده كانت سرعته كبيرة يبقى عنده more energy. When the car hits something, it loses some of its energy and the speed decreases till the car stops. بما ان الاوبجكتس اللي بتتحرك عندها طاقه كبيره جدا، اول ما هتخبط في حاجه هتبتدي تفقد جزء من طاقتها وهتعمل slowing down لحد ما تقف. Remember that we'll explore more about energy in the next lessons and concepts because this will help us in the unit project. تركيزنا الفتره الجايه هيكون عن الانرجي، عن الطاقه، عشان نقدر نعمل البروجكت بتاعنا. تعالوا اوريكم example على الفريكشن on smooth surface and on rough surface. Here we have example of two roads. الطريق ده smooth surface. بمعنى ايه smooth؟ smooth يعني ناعم، يعني ما فيهوش تعريجات كتير، زي مثلا الطريق لما بيكون فيه مطره، اوكي؟ والطريق ده rough اللي هو الشكل الطبيعي للطريق بتاعنا، يعني فيه تعريجات كده ومش ناعم. Let's see the difference in movement in both surfaces وإمتى بيكون عندي friction كتيرة. Let's try the smooth surface. I'll move the car on the smooth surface and I want you to observe the amount of friction. خلي بالكوا الفريكشن هي اللي بتعمل slowing down or stopping the object. لاحظوا تاني هيبقى فيه friction عالية ولا قليلة. The amount of friction is high or low. Okay? Did you observe the movement of car on smooth surface? طب تعالوا نشوف on the rough surface هيحصل ايه. Oh, the car stopped before reaching the bottom. تاني let's try on the rough surface والمرة دي هنركز على amount of friction. الفريكشن هي اللي بتعمل stopping. So if the car stops fast, this means we have high friction or large amount of friction force. Did you observe this? There is a great difference between the smooth surface and the rough surface. The smooth surface عنده low friction والrough surface عنده high friction. بمعنى ان العربيات هتقدر تقف بسهولة جدا لو الطريق كان rough، لأن الفريكشن معناها slowing down or stopping. Let's write now the answer to the question on page 149. The question is, when a car crashes into a wall, what do you think of the size of the force of the car compared to the size of the force of the wall? لو حصل collision لcar في wall. For example, if this is the car and here we have a wall. إيه اللي هيحصل لو العربية دي هتخبط في الوال؟ عايزاك تعمل comparison للamount of force، كمية الطاقة ما بين العربية دي، القوة ما بين العربية وما بين الوال، مين أكتر؟ So do you assume that when the car hit the wall, the force of the car was the same as the wall؟ كانوا equal لبعض ولا it was different؟ Take your time and remember what we said in Malik's answer. Are you ready for our last task in our today's lesson? After several steps of research and exploration, scientists need to evaluate the accuracy of results they have. This is what we will do now in activity 9. Evaluate like a scientist. Our Evaluate Like a Scientist activity is called Launching a Satellite. Let me show you the title. يعني إيه launching a satellite؟ يعني إزاي الأقمار الصناعية بتتثبت. We will evaluate what we learned about the balanced and unbalanced forces and their effect on the motion of objects in a unique example, which is launching a satellite in space. إزاي هنقدر نثبت الساتلايت في السبيس؟ What impact do different forces have on a huge object like a satellite? And how does its energy change in every moment its motion change? إزاي بنقدر نثبت الساتلايت وإزاي الطاقة بتتغير وإحنا بنحاول نثبته؟ Let's read the text on page 150 and in each paragraph circle the correct word or phrase in the choices. We will read the first paragraph together, then you will continue on your own to check the rest of the text. Let's start. Now we are in activity 9. Launching a satellite. هنتكلم ازاي يثبتوا satellites في السبيس. Every new satellite is carried into space by a rocket. عشان نطلع القمر الصناعي بنطلعه عن طريق صاروخ، بنثبته في صاروخ وبنطلعه لسبيس. Before launch, the rocket stands tall on its launch pad. It stays still because forces acting upon it. The forces are balanced, pushing it down, ولا unbalanced. لو قريتوا آخر sentence تاني it stays still. Stay still يعني بيقف ثابت. Because forces acting upon it are. Do you think the rocket at the beginning stable or not? The rocket at the beginning, it was stable or not? Remember that object remain stable because the different forces acting upon them have the same size and are in opposite direction. So the correct answer will be balanced forces. لازم كنتوا تعملوا highlight على كلمة stay still. امتى الأوبجكت يقف ثابت؟ لما يبقى عندي two forces equal لبعض and in opposite direction. So this is the balanced force. Do you expect that energy is great or little when the rocket is stable? If we remember the example of a fire extinguisher, we will expect that its energy is little because it's stable. أكيد بما إن الروكت هنا كان ثابت فأكيد الانرجي بتاعته قليلة، لأن كل ما هتزيد الانرجي كل ما هتزيد الفورس كل ما لازم يكون عندي موشن. اتفقنا ان الروكتس وهي بتطلع الساتلايتس قبل ما تبتدي تطلع بتبقى stable force او stable بمعنى انها عندها balanced forces، وهي بتطلع الساتلايت بتبتدي rotate around the earth. Then it fixes the satellite. طب الساتلايت لما بنعمل له fixing في السبيس بيفضل يروتيت at constant speed. ليه بيفضل يروتيت at constant speed؟ عشان there is no air in that space, so there is less friction force or there is no friction force. I'll give you some time to continue reading the text to choose the correct words the same way we choose the last answer. Focus while answering and try to predict the rocket's energy in all its motion stages. عايزاكم تركزوا جدا جدا في كل الكيوردز اللي احنا قلناها على مدار اللسن. We have finished today's lesson in which we reviewed the force concept. We learned about the balanced and the unbalanced force and learned what affects stopping motion, including friction force. friction force كانت من أهم الكلمات اللي ركزنا عليها النهاردة، وقلنا إن الفريكشن بتسبب slowing down or stopping the objects، واتفقنا إن لازم نركز إن في difference between friction on a smooth surface على طريق ناعم أو على rough surface. We also started to think like physical scientists to understand the role of friction force as a satellite can keep traveling at the same speed for hundreds of years without being stopped. This is because there is no air in the space that causes friction with the satellite. اتفقنا ان الساتلايت هيقعد سنين طويلة جدا بيلف في السبيس من غير ما يغير سرعته لان مش هيبقى فيه friction، والفريكشن هي السبب الرئيسي في ان يحصل slowing down or stopping. The last thing I want you to do is to bring with your colleagues different cars in shapes and sizes. Then identify a specific road to move the car on, so the friction force affects the car is little. Then you can see which car will be the fastest. عايزاكوا تجيبوا عربيات انت وزمايلك وتجربوا على smooth surface تعملوا سباق عربيات وتشوفوا انهي عربية هتبقى الفاستست. This will help us in our hands-on investigation in the next lesson. The next lesson we will search like scientists to know the relation between force and energy. Thank you, my lovely students, and see you next time.